Danny, it's great to have you on the road to autonomy. We're expanding more into agriculture, and your company, Reservoir, you're playing a really big role there. You have really great data on it. One of the things that stood out to me, less than 2% of specialty ag is automated. That's 2%. There's still 98% to go, hypothetically. Why is that?
It's a great question. It's a fun one to start with. So I've had friends visit some of the specialty crop regions like the Central Coast, the Central Valley, and they come from Brazil, they come from the Midwest, and they say, Danny, what are all these people doing on the farm? You can drive through you can drive through the Midwest. You can drive for 5,000 miles and see maybe one tractor or two people. If you go to a 40-acre strawberry farm, let's say in Watsonville or Salinas, you might see 70, 80 farm workers. It is a completely different function. It's a completely different business. It almost looks like a F1 pit crew versus looking like a Midwest farm. There are massive unsolved challenges, technical opportunities in specialty crop, both on harvest labor and non-harvest labor. And a lot of what we're focused on is what are the opportunities in physical AI and automation that are going to be unlocked in the next, dozen, 2 dozen years.
California is home to some of the greatest wines. It won the Judgment of Paris. Well done, Bo Barrett and team at Chateau Montelena on that. But you mentioned Central Coast. So Central Coast, you have Manfred Krenkel with Cinquano making great wines down there north of Ventura. And then obviously you have Napa. And the reason I bring that up is there's been multiple reports out of the San Francisco Herald, multiple Napa Valley reports. Wines aren't selling and the wineries are closing. Do you see potential for automation to go in there so these wineries, which is a backbone of California's image, can continue to produce wine by using automation because of the growing economic situations about the declining in drinking?
Yeah, it's a great question, Grace. I mean, I think we can, maybe take a step back and say that because there's so much opportunity for automation in specialty crops. So what are specialty crops? Specialty crops are fruits, vegetables, nuts, horticulture, flowers, etc. These are some of the highest value crops. So I'll just give you an example that 1 acre of strawberries is about $100,000 of value, if not more. They call it red gold. So this whole segment, John Deere calls it high value crops. Specialty crops is something that you hear kind of comes out of DC or comes out of kind of comparing it to broad acre. It's almost like saying your specialty, we're going to pat you on the head, your specialty. But an interesting data point about specialty is that it's about 5% of US acreage, about 40% of farm gate value. Specialty crops, about 5% of US acreage, about 40% of farm gate value. So it is a disproportionate value into the American farm gate, even if it's less acreage. And part of the reason why it hasn't scaled to more acreage is because it is so labor intensive and it's skilled labor. So that labor really doesn't scale, and therefore specialty crop farming very often doesn't scale. And so that's where we've found is there's a really significant opportunity. So commodities like wine grapes, which are multi-billion-dollar commodities like strawberries or leafy greens, significant automation and opportunities, which will help growers sort of ride those supply and demand curves. And we're clearly in one of those right now with wine grapes.
Do you have any, obviously Napa's known for the climate, same in the Central Coast and north of Ventura, but are there any geographical restrictions from a climate perspective where the specialty can be grown, such as strawberries? Are there only certain parts of the country where they could be grown, or can specialty be grown across the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, companies, producers like Driscoll's and Gallo's certainly have perspectives about the ideal growing conditions, and that's where sort of the in-house agronomy and R&D teams will have a very specific point of view. When we were deciding where to place reservoir farms, for example, we consulted strawberry producers and we consulted leafy greens producers, and we actually looked for a farm that was viewed as being acceptable by both sides of that equation. And we had some areas that we'd chosen in South Monterey County that some of the strawberry producers said were too windy to be the ideal strawberry conditions. And so that's just an example of how, yes, there certainly are climate conditions that lend themselves better. The part of why we have so much specialty in California is because you can get 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 growing cycles for certain crops before it becomes too wet and wintry. The entire leafy green industry moves down to Yuma, Arizona practically during the winter. And so if you look at a bag of lettuce during the winter that you pick up at Whole Foods, there's a pretty high chance that that's actually coming from Arizona. So there are a lot of sort of climate-driven elements here, and a lot of it's driven by the fact that we have Mediterranean climates here. We don't get snow here.
You do get snow in the mountains, and you have great skiing in Tahoe, so just gotta point that out as you go up.
We do. Here, meaning Central Coast, at least where we are. But yeah, you don't see too many strawberries up in Tahoe.
No, you don't. So you have climate weather on one side, you have labor shortage on the other, but then you have declining acreages because since 1984, 1.6 million acres of California farmland has ceased to exist. Is that because of labor, or is there something more that's leading to that unfortunate decline?
Yeah, there are a handful of different things. So one of them is that it is becoming increasingly expensive to farm in California. And that is due to the rising labor prices, rising input prices. Fertilizers more expensive, inputs are more expensive, labor is more expensive, and also regulation is more expensive. There's a Cal Poly study that came out that said that regulatory costs have essentially gone up about 10x in the last 20 years. And as California labor, or really labor in the American West, has become more scarce and more expensive, there's been an increased reliance on foreign labor. And that is very expensive and it's highly regulated. And in a lot of other industries, and I'm sure you've seen some of these studies that have come out where the labor becomes more expensive, more scarce, you see increased adoption of autonomy. And so that's part of why we view this as an opportunity. The other is that there's just a significant, call it cost difference between farming specialty in Peru versus farming specialty in California. It's about a 10x difference. And so as a result of the sort of shifts in cost structures and underlying economics in farming, we have a less secure food supply than we even did 20, 25 years ago.
To me, is scary because, and I'm going to cite this to the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, the United States grows by one person every 56 seconds. That's not minutes, that's seconds. 56 seconds, a new person is either born or migrates to the United States. And you know that. We need to eat. We all need to eat. So is this creating the perfect storm? And I ask that because I have friends that are investors in QSRs, quick service restaurants. And because of the rising labor cost, they're going to automation. So I look at this from my perspective, like, okay, this is the perfect storm that automation is going to accelerate just because of the economic conditions that are being put on by some of these regulations.
We agree. I think the other side of the same coin is the rise of physical AI. So a lot of the conditions that you're describing have been true for the last 25 years. And in the previous vintage, let's say 2017, 2018, a lot of the same conditions existed. And very, very smart investors said, now's the time we're going to see that increase in adoption of automation in specialty crops. This is one of the last sort of markets to be automated. Look at that stat, only 2%, et cetera, et cetera. But only now with physical AI and the real world models and digital simulation and fleet man and all these things, software defined hardware, all of these things now coming together, we think sort of help this moment arrive.
I agree with that. From your perspective, are you starting to see investors turn their attention to the opportunities in ag tech? We've had some successful exits. Blue River was acquired by John Deere, Bear Flag acquired by Deere. So you had some pretty notable exits. But when you look at it from either the trucking side or the passenger robotaxi side, the numbers are a lot different. How are you seeing investors thinking about the ag tech opportunity from your perspective?
Yeah, we're seeing significant changes really over the last year to year and a half. I think we're seeing a lot more openness to this being a moment in time, or at least the beginning of a longer term cycle. And we think there are a couple of things that are driving that. One would be that there's a stronger belief from incumbents that the technology is ready around precision and precision agriculture, and they have to acquire a lot of that capability to bring that capability in-house. They have to partner or acquire. And so you might see a partnership, let's say, between an incumbent OEM and a perception company or an autonomy company. And those are sort of leading to an acquisition in the future. We're seeing more and more of that behavior because there's an acknowledgement from the incumbents that precision technology is here and they need to have the talent. I think the second thing that's happening is services revenue, and an acknowledgement that they need to be selling hardware, but they need to be selling software on top as well. And a lot of the differentiation in services will come from autonomy. We're seeing it, of course, in consumer auto, and we're expecting to see similar kind of packaging and the adoption of similar packaging when the incumbent sort of OEMs and others have to really justify those service models, and advanced technology will be a big part of it. I I think the third will be the competitive moat with China. And there are robotics companies in agriculture that are going to make their way here. And we already saw a big lockdown when it came to drones. And so that will be a major pressure point as well that we think will lead to additional acquisition activity.
And do you think that will lead to policies being put in place where we've seen on the truck side, in the car side? Do you think the policies, protectionist policies, will be put in place when that starts to happen? Because you're starting to see now on the humanoid side, there's a bill going through the House and Congress to say, wait a second, we can't allow this. Is that going to come to ag at some point, do you think?
I think it's very likely. I mean, there's obviously a long-standing and very deep connection between agriculture and policy. We do expect that some of those protectionist policies will get put in place. They may take some time, but what we don't think is that it will be highly catalytic, especially when it comes to how these companies compete on a global scale. So even if we end up having, let's say, those policies happening at a domestic level, they're going to have a significant impact on how these companies are competing globally. In the case of a lot of the incumbent companies in agriculture, Brazil's a massive market, India is a massive market, et cetera. And so they will be competing in the sandbox there. And that's where, even if they may not have the Chinese competition within the United States, they'll have it in India, they'll have it in Brazil.
The competition's there, but in order to have the competition, you have to have the talent. Are there major talent pools around the United States where founders are starting companies around ag tech? Because we've seen obviously the Valley for all things tech, but are there any particular ag tech hubs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there absolutely are. I think that there are a few different ways to look at it. One is there are a group of founders, really phenomenal ones, that are coming out of physical AI and robotics and are looking for very real problems to solve. And that is something we're extremely excited about. I got a cold LinkedIn message from a VP at Amazon. You know, VP at Amazon is basically a CEO title, saying, "We're thinking about autonomy in ag. Can we come and visit your farm?" And that was extraordinarily exciting. And we're getting more and more signal like that about companies that are, or founders, like absolute world-class founders that are operating in physical AI, that are looking for problems that have real-world impact. And I would also say that they're looking to work up, they're looking to work outside. They're looking to roll up their sleeves. They're looking to be able to kind of connect with the dirt. And so from that perspective, agriculture is kind of an extraordinary place for the physical AI founder.
I think it's a wonderful place. It's a great sandbox or dirt box to play in. You've got all sorts of fun things that you can do.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's really amazing. I mean, our startup incubator, which is called Reservoir Farms, when we open up the barn door, you have a view of Steinbeck's pastures of heaven. So I think what our hypothesis is that this is going to draw out a certain type of entrepreneur that wants to see real impact, that wants to be able to kind of have an impact to rural economies, wants to be able to help secure the food supply, and want to see their technology really adopted at scale. And agriculture really offers that. So in terms of the hubs, we see that there are a bunch. The University of California system is absolutely one. We've worked very closely with UC Davis, which is actually my alma mater, is long considered an amazing ag school. There are entrepreneurs coming out of Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, MIT, et cetera. So there is a lot of where sort of deep tech is already thought of as being a significant origination point. That's a lot of where we're seeing these sort of ag/physical AI founders.
Which is wonderful because it's diversified. It's not one pocket. Like farming, there's not one pocket. There's multiple opportunities to deploy the technology on a farm. When a founder's getting to the point, or the founders are getting to the point, okay, we've got an MVP, minimal viable product, we want to get real world experience. Do you see them going to the family farms, trying to approach more of a corporate farm? Perhaps it's a family friend. How do you see that process going? And then at the end of the day, do you want them all hopefully to come to Reservoir first?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we began to build the business plan for Reservoir, we spoke to about 100 startups. And one of the questions we asked them was, after you'd raised venture capital, how long until you were putting your prototype on an actual farm? So you raise venture capital, you have a prototype, how long until you're testing it on a real farm? And the average we heard, Grayson, was between 6 to 9 months. So one of the biggest impediments to the scaling and acceleration of early stage ag tech was access to the farm. And so that's something that we specifically have tried to address. Our perspective is that largely they should be testing in commercial conditions, primarily because it's very, very challenging economically to get your first product to pencil for the family farm. It's much easier to get it to pencil for the corporate or more consolidated farmer. It's just brass tacks. So, what's challenging, let's just say, for example, you're trying to solve $1 million problem and you have $1 million machine. Well, that works if you're dealing with a corporate farmer. But what might be the $1 million problem for the small farmer, they might be able to pay $10,000 for it. So you're going to need, let's say, 3, 4, 5 additional years of R&D. The equivalent essentially is Lucid starting with the Air and now moving mid-market with future products. Tesla doing the same. It took them a while to get to the Model 3. And we really actually see similar cycles when it comes to agriculture and similar expectations when it comes to agriculture, which is that you're kind of starting at the higher end, addressing that market need, and then you could move further down to the family farm.
Do corporate farmers have an appetite to engage with startups, or is it we've been doing it this way for 100 years and we're not changing?
They absolutely do. I think that farmers are, by and large, inclined to be adopting technology. I think the challenge is that they're looking for return on investment, ideally within 2 years. If a product is saying, listen, my pitch is that your return on investment might be 3, 4, 5, 6 years, it's very hard to make that case. But if you have a 2-year ROI, it can work. And in that case, that'll open a lot of doors for you. But farmers are really listening and kind of looking for new technology all the time. Part of the challenge that we've found is that even some of the largest farming operations may have one full-time R&D person, may not have a full-time R&D person. Even a large farming operation, if they have an R&D team, they may have one person working on precision tech because they have others working on genetics and inputs and all these different aspects of the operation. So a lot of the challenge is sort of getting that product marketing down. So you're really clear on your value proposition, you're really clear on your ROI cycle. And then those companies that sort of fit into that realm, we see pretty significant adoption. 2 examples from this current cycle: Carbon Robotics and Eco Robotics. Verdant Robotics, you'd also put them in that category. They're about to announce a new funding round. So there are companies that have been able to hone their value proposition, get the ROI cycle down, get the price point down, and they're seeing adoption.
You're seeing traction in the market for physical AI when Jensen goes out there and talks about it, at least from the Wall Street perspective of this audience. Everybody's ears chirp up. Jensen said something. And then I've been very fortunate to spend time with Deere and various other individuals inside of ag tech. So to me, it's a healthy ecosystem. It's an evolving ecosystem. Where does Reservoir sit in the ecosystem of ag tech today? And as you grow Reservoir, where do you eventually want it to sit?
Yeah, so our interest in building Reservoir was that we saw that there was going to be a significant opportunity for physical AI in specialty crop agriculture. We talked about this, only 2% of specialty crop agriculture is automated. So then the next step was really we studied the early stage R&D landscape. We studied the incubators, we studied the accelerators, we studied the funds, and we found a gap. We found that there was not a startup sort of space, a startup innovation center that was really purpose-built for physical AI. Another really simple way to put it, Grayson, is there isn't a single farm that we found that existed solely for the purpose of startups being able to test.
I'm sitting here dumbfounded and just saying, why?
Well, a lot of it comes down to how hard it is to kind of assemble all these pieces together. We've seen things like Y Combinator, they're finished products, but really they've been iterating on that model for 25 years, right? Or 25 years. So something like Reservoir is a purpose-built startup incubator for physical AI and specialty crops. It's a very, very specific thing. We have a 40-acre farm that's actually outside that window that is farmed by Tanner and Antle and Nature Right to absolutely world-class producers. And the purpose of that farm is so startups can test and grow. That's the only reason that farm exists. The growers will be able to take that fruit and those vegetables to market. But the reason that farming operation exists is for startups. That as a function, a farm that exists for startups did not exist in the American West when we began working on this project. So that in and of itself is like a pretty significant impediment towards getting the right solutions to market and specialty. So how Reservoir views itself as being really a friend of the early stage startup, an accelerant, catalytic. We're seeing early stage deep tech startups working in autonomy, working in precision, that are now viewing Reservoir as its home for the first year to year and a half of their existence. And then they can kind of graduate and scale up and begin to commercialize. So we're that early stage thing. We're YC, but for ag tech.
Are you seeing the early stage firms, let's say the day one firm, that are moving to the area and actively testing there, engaging with the local community and understanding it, or are they building somewhere else and just coming there for pilot days or demo days?
That's a great question. We certainly saw that what you described was the legacy behavior. What we're seeing more now is an acknowledgement from the physical AI startup that if they really want to address the need, if they really want to build trust, they have to go really deep. An example that I very often use with startup founders is Uber was in San Francisco for 1 year before they went to a second city. When Instagram sold to Facebook way back when, they hadn't even launched an Android app yet. They were only on the iPhone. They didn't launch an Android app until they were already acquired by Facebook. So there is so much of a benefit of going really deep. So what does it look like to go deep in specialty crop agriculture? It means that you are bringing your founding team to Salinas, you're bringing your founding team to a rural region, you're going super deep, and you're building trust. And this is actually the playbook of three or four of the more successful companies from this vintage, is they actually went really deep in one market before expanding beyond that. I'll give you another example, which is one of the founders in our incubator was a former NASA engineer, and he started an ag tech company. When I met him, he was living in San Francisco, and he was wearing hoodies and skinny jeans and slick back hair and all that. And now, about 6 months later, he's fully integrated into the rural region. He's still the same dude. He's completely authentic, but he's wearing flannels tucked into jeans, big belt buckle, and boots. He's got a pretty full beard like you, and he is fully integrated. He shows up at the crab feed with the young ranchers. He's going to the right charity functions. He's going to he's going to the growers pub and all those things. And so there's no question that that's helping accelerate his business. Now he's raised around. He's got growers on his cap table. He has trials underway, and he's accelerating. There is a belief, Grayson, before we started working on this, that you couldn't accelerate ag tech, that the accelerator model didn't fit the space. And what we learned is that none of the existing programs really fit the model. And so now we're already starting to see very tangible, very measurable acceleration where these companies will get to product market fit faster. They'll get to beyond the first article faster, all those things. And we think that it came down to like fundamentally reinventing the model.
Do you think that individual, that founder, had all that success because, as you said, clearly engaged with the community and said, you know what? I want to be a farmer. I don't want to just be a gentleman farmer, I'll use the term. I want to be a real farmer.
Well, I can tell you a lot of farmers are gentlemen for sure, which maybe is something that surprised me as I really got into this, is that I'd be sitting across from a farmer and someone like Stuart Wolf, who's one of the best known farmers in California. And Stuart could be a Sandhill Road VC. He's brilliant. He's affable. He's light on his feet and all these things. It just happens that he was born into a farming family. So there are a ton of gentleman farmers out there for sure, which actually I think is something that a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate, is that they're dealing with a very sophisticated buyer and a very rational one, which I think is actually really good for startups. But Stuart really wants to see that you're completely committed to the space, that if you're building technology for agave, that you're all in, because he's all in. He's really betting the future of the family on agave. And if you're betting your software-defined hardware on agave, he wants to see that you're in Fresno County, that you're in Merced County or wherever it is. So that's natural. And so I think that those are actually really rational asks and really rational decisions from the ag tech entrepreneur to get more integrated into rural communities.
Yeah, I like it because it's going to create economic prosperity in regions that, let's be honest, some need it and some it can help. And you think about that from a local business perspective. You're raising a family there. You can go to the hamburger, the ice cream, and they're going to create new jobs and hire people. It becomes this really great ecosystem that gets born. And because of what physical AI is enabling. And these entrepreneurs are rolling their sleeves up and say, I want to be a part of this. I want to build this. It's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. We see one of the real exciting things about ag tech is the potential to really provide high road jobs in rural communities. And part of why we situated our incubators in rural regions is because of the potential for economic development benefit. It's why the state of California has been one of our biggest backers so far, and why we've also just received a lot of kind of community support, is we try to really connect ag tech outcomes with rural development outcomes.
Which is wonderful. What is it like when a startup applies, gets in, and joins the program. And as you said, they go in through the barn door. What's it like? What do they get?
Yeah, so I'm at Reservoir Farms right now, and about 200 feet from me is a 6,000 square foot prototyping studio that has a bunch of booths that are sort of dedicated for different startups, and so the startups basically receive sort of their dedicated space, and they have also access to our sort of community machines and things like that. They have access to technicians that we have on site, and then if they want to test their prototype, our prototyping shop is adjacent to the 40-acre specialty crop farm. So all they have to do is roll out their machine or hitch it to a trailer or hitch it to a tractor, and they are immediately testing. So what they get is access to the only on-farm prototyping studio for robotics that exists anywhere that we found. And that really, we think, can accelerate these companies.
I fully agree with that. How many companies at one time can you have on the farm?
Yeah, we can have about, right now at our current capacity, we can have 12. And we have 12 that will be in our spring cohort, which is really exciting. And it will therefore be the densest collection of ag tech companies working in one place in the history of the world, which is really cool. So we call it the Olympic Village of ag tech. We've got 2 Dutch companies, 2 Canadian companies, and some MIT founders, some Cornell founders, really folks coming from all over the world to be here. And they'll be working side by side. They'll be comparing notes. Ideally, they're not reinventing the wheel. Grayson, that's been a big challenge also in a lot of physical AI and a lot of autonomy in general is you don't need to build the mobility base because you can work with FarmNG, you can work with Burrow, you can then focus on your camera or whatever it might be. And so companies then are able to collaborate here as a result of that. So that's a lot of the dynamic that we also offer is that sort of community integration. And we also have a bunch of corporate partners here. So I met a founder a few years ago who had an amazing prototype of a celery harvester. And he said to me, hey, do you know anyone at John Deere? And I was like, I happen to. That's really something I can help with. And he said, oh my gosh, it's been so hard for us to find a way in. And so we have John Deere coming by all the time, Netafim, Toro Irrigation, Nutrien, Wilbur Ellis. So a lot of these big agricultural incumbents are also part of our ecosystem, in addition to the Driscolls and the Taylors and the Tanner Nantles and things like that.
When a startup gets to a point where they're raised money and they have to go to the next step, is there a graduation ceremony or what does it look like when the companies graduate from the farm to go on to the next step?
Yeah, so we think that the ideal time frame for startups to be here is about 12 to 18 months. We don't want startups to get too long in the tooth here to get too big. Part of when we studied the incubator model, sometimes you'll have an incubator that becomes too reliant on one tenant, sometimes even financially. So we visited incubators where 30-40% of the benches are filled by one company. I visited at one incubator and they were just sheepish about it, but 80% of the benches were leased by one company. So their entire model was reliant on one company that had sort of grown too big inside the incubator, but it was the only way they could really keep the lights on. So we will basically ship them out after a certain amount of time, and then they have to find a local office space or they have to find some sort of scale up space. We're in a rural region, so there are shops and warehouses available if they need to outfit them, and that's totally possible being in this ecosystem. But that's the idea: is we want to be focusing the core of our incubator, the residency of our incubator on early stage companies.
Did the majority of the companies that graduate, do you see them staying in the region or do you see them going across the globe when they graduate?
Well, one of the things we suggest to a startup is to really follow the crop. And so if they're working in permanent crops, if they're working in tree nuts, they're working in apples, and if they want to get multiple cycles, they will have to go international at some point. They might even end up going international in their second or third year. And so, for example, Bonsai Robotics, which is a company that we invested in, they have actually spent a lot of time in Australia. They're working primarily in tree nuts. And so they've spent a lot of time in Australia in almonds and things like that. So that's been a really interesting phenomenon is to see them really engage that market. And you hear that from a lot of the sort of scale-up companies. They end up forming dealer partnerships there. They end up building offices there and things like that. It really depends on the crop that you're focused on. If you're doing strawberries, you really can actually get everything you need by mostly sort of starting in the north, going down to Santa Maria, Ventura, Baja, Mexico, etc. You can find strawberries year round in that context. So we see different things. There's a John Deere Gator going outside my door right now. A couple of folks on my team driving, so I got a little bit distracted. I must have just arrived. So yeah, so I think we see different things happening. Honestly, Grayson, companies scaling up in different ways. I think one of the big questions also is, are they staying in specialty crops? Are they moving into broadacre? And specialty crops really is viewed as a great entry point because the margins are better. Your machine can also be slower. So a machine might start out at 3 or 4 miles per hour if it's in specialty, but then by the time it gets to broadacre, it needs to be 10 to 15 miles an hour. And so from that perspective, also, we see companies maybe starting in the American West and moving into the Midwest to expand their product line. So that's part of why we love specialties. We see a lot of the origination of companies happening here. And it's really a wonderful entry point to kind of tackle broader ag and tackle broadacre.
You also have a venture fund on Reservoir. What are you looking for with these companies? Is it the ability to stay in specialty or expand outside of specialty? What are you exactly looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a venture fund. We call it Reservoir VC. It's a $50 million early stage vehicle. We invest half of our portfolio is in ag tech applications and specialty crop autonomy. And then we're also actively looking for deals in what we call the rugged physical AI stack. So we don't only invest in ag tech, we also invest in physical AI. We're very interested in the companies that are part of the robot, basically part of the modular build of the robot, and that's something we're very interested in. We're looking for significant technology differentiation. We're looking for startups that are solving real problems, and then we're also looking for companies that are willing to, especially in their first or second year, go very deep and integrate into the rural communities. We view that as a differentiator. We will turn down a company if we think they have a wonderful team and wonderful tech, but we don't see that sort of depth of commitment. Because it's something that we firmly believe is critical to the go-to-market strategy, is are they willing to go deep? And so those are some of the things we're looking for. But we're investing very early, and that's where we also see that a lot of the joy can be found in ag tech, is seeing multiples from earlier stage investment.
If you don't go deep in this industry, you really have nothing. I've been fortunate to spend time on farms in Nebraska, Wyoming, throughout the West, and in California, where I used to live. It's a culture within a culture, and you have to understand the needs and the wants of that culture. And if you're flying in, dropping in a robot and leaving, they're not going to trust you. Trust is a huge part of this. How does trust get built when you're putting these physical AI robots on farms? What has to be done to get the farmer comfortable with this technology? Because at the end of the day, for the family farmer or the commercial farmer, that's their lifeline, that's their bloodline, and they're not going to take any risk if they don't have to.
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it comes down to is the entrepreneur really listening and thinking about, are they integrating into the existing farm operation, or are they imagining sort of a future farm operation that doesn't yet exist? And we see a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs are thinking about how do they nest into the existing farm operation. The entrepreneur actually can access acre level sort of economic reports about crops. So they can look at UC Davis data, they can look at Research Commission data, they can look at UCNR data, and they could say, okay, let's look at the strawberry acre and let's look at where all the costs are going to. And they have to be able to really clearly understand which of the costs that they're replacing, and ideally which of the costs they're reducing, and which of the line items they're reducing. And that's where a lot of the new business models end up emerging, is looking at that cost structure and saying, listen, we think we can do this more efficiently with technology. It might cost the same amount, but we can give you more data, whatever it might be. So that's a lot of where we're seeing companies focus, is they have to be able to really clearly identify what aspect of the existing farm operation are they really nesting into. And that's where they end up seeing more adoption if they have a better understanding of that cost structure. I'll give you a tangible example. There's a company we really like called SkySense. Justin is an awesome founder. And Justin was looking for different kind of areas of product market fit for a couple of years. And they ended up coming up with a AI-enabled drone technology that served as bird mitigation. And bird mitigation and sort of the related sort of crop damage that comes from bird mitigation is a really significant cost. And as I've spoken to growers in Arizona and Washington and California, and I bring up SkySense, they're like, oh my gosh, right, we would love to meet them. We spend this much money on bird mitigation. And to your point about sort of industry within an industry within an industry, the only way you would discover that is if you went really deep. There's no way you could be an outsider and think, I'm going to make something for bird mitigation that would be valuable. And so as a result of this, Justin's been able to build a really nice business, and they're about to raise a pretty nice round. So that comes from that immersion, and that's an amazing physical AI story. And he's solving a real problem, and he's actually also doing it in a way that's wildlife friendly, which is awesome, which we love. So it's a version of clean tech.
And the cool part is, or the best part, he's creating value for the farmers. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he's replacing the current solution, which is shooting a shotgun into the trees. Like that's literally the current way it's done in some cases. So that's a pretty exciting step forward, and we're seeing more and more solutions like that come up, where startups are going deeper. They're finding a very specific line item that might in some ways have been disguised. They're then doing multiple interviews with growers to kind of validate it. They're refining an ultra specific solution, and then they can go across different commodities, or they can go across different crops. They can start to solve adjacent problems, and they can build really nice, recognizable businesses that are essentially software enabled hardware businesses that kind of look like SaaS businesses. SaaS businesses start really specific. You find product market fit, you find your buyer, you can kind of, expand in really smart adjacencies. So that only happens, to your point, when you go really deep. Otherwise, you're just not going to find those things from the outside. There's a classic thing you hear in tech, which is sort of a solution in search of a problem. And you hear that a lot in ag tech, especially when you kind of come from Silicon Valley into the rural regions. But the folks who have Silicon Valley sort of tech experience and they're willing to go deep, they'll start to find those things. And I'm seeing like really good metrics on these businesses that are starting to look like real service businesses, real legitimate agricultural and ag tech businesses. They're starting from something that is real and that in a cost that might have otherwise been disguised.
Which is great. Where do you think the inspiration comes from for founders that have an idea but looking to deploy it? And then, aha, ag. Where do you think that inspiration comes from? Is it perhaps a family member was a farmer? Where does it come from?
It's a great question. I mean, I think I've seen it come from different places. Certainly, folks who grew up in Bakersfield and went to Stanford, and now they're thinking about agriculture. Like that's a pretty logical path for sure. We're also seeing a version of an entrepreneur that is like flush with talent, flush with technical context, but they're really looking for a real problem to solve. And if they kind of follow the principle of the technology they're solving, they'll realize, I'm a world expert at sort of call it, aerial understanding and spatial mitigation and all these different things. And you're like, well, what are the 4 or 5 things I can do with that? Happens that bird mitigation is one of them. Oh my gosh. Like wildlife mitigation is one of those things. And then you look at sort of where is wildlife mitigation an issue? Well, airports, because they disturb planes, or, in farming because they, cause crop damage. So if founders are being really principled and they're really looking for the highest, best use of their technology, they will find their way to agriculture. And I think they'll find their way to impact. I think they'll find their way to scale. So that's a lot of also what we're seeing is folks who kind of follow this, technical journey and realize that they could actually have a lot of real world impact here. Another example of that is a company called Budbreak Innovation, which came out of Cornell. And these are a couple of founders who are whip smart, had no pre-existing connection to this, and they basically were very interested in detection-related use cases and cameras, and then found their way into disease detection for vineyards. And there's so much enthusiasm from them that I've seen these really funny interactions, Grayson, between them and a wine grower, where they'll ask the grower, "Have you this is going? Have you seen any kind of disease?" And then they go, "Oh my God, that's incredible!" And I have to say to them, "Guys, you can't be excited about disease detection." They're like, "Well, we're really excited about it." I'm like, "Yeah, but the grower may not be as excited as you are." So I think that's an example of like, you can tell that they're so excited. Why? Because they're seeing the applicability of their technology, something they created maybe in a completely different context, but finding life, like that's an amazing thing. And I think part of why Reservoir exists is we wanted to be able to provide a bridge between Silicon Valley and Salinas Valley. And that has required so much like activation energy previously. Find a farm, find a shop, find a grower, all these things. And we're just trying to make that really easy. We can have more of those aha moments.
The disease example is great. This is an unfortunate situation that Napa Valley went through, was the fire they had. Have you seen any interesting technologies around fire mitigation emerge, or what to do? Because this was a big problem. I forget what harvest it was when the fire got into the grapes, and a lot of unfortunate wineries had very bad financial years because of the fire. Have you seen any technology that's emerged to try and solve that problem? Which I'm not being Notre Dame, but we all know is going to happen again at some point, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that we're on the hunt for interesting kind of wildfire mitigation technologies, and we know there's a lot of research going into it that was funded maybe 3 or 4 years ago through the University of California. We're monitoring some of those outcomes. We're very excited about climate mitigation in general as a technology area. It's kind of a Star Trek one. There's a company called Sunscreen, which is in and around Stanford, that is basically creating an artificial fog layer, and so that's a really fun example. And I've seen some of the demonstrations of technology where they're basically doing heat mitigation and heat protection and climate mitigation. So sort of like the Star Trek future meets farming folks are really excited about that one for sure. And we're very Borlagian in that way. You were starting to kind of get into the questions around sort of food security and what do we do by 2050? We think reservoir fits perfectly into that narrative. And so yeah, I think that that's an area to watch for sure and one to follow. We have a reservoir location in Sonoma County. We worked with Sonoma County wine growers, so we have one that's active in Salinas, which is leafy greens, vegetables, and strawberries. We have one in Sonoma County, which is 15 acres of Pinot. So we have a ag tech, deep tech viticulture incubator. And then we're also building one in the Central Valley of California, which is really the agricultural heartland. And we're building it in Merced, which is about 2 hours south of Sacramento and 2 hours north of Bakersfield. So it's kind of the Central Valley is vast, and that will be peppers, tomatoes, carrots, almonds, pistachios, table grapes, citrus, olives, and other crops. That will be our Central Valley flagship location will be in Merced. So we're hoping to see more and more climate mitigation technologies coming through those areas which have significant climate risk.
How long until you expand up to Washington State or over to Arizona to additional states?
Yeah, I think it could be as soon as this year or early next year. We're in active conversations with both areas. I've made 2 trips to Eastern Washington this year, visiting with Washington State University and other partners. That is an extraordinary area for innovation. Washington State owns the Cosmic Crisp apple, the Rainier cherry. So there's a lot of amazing heritage in Washington around some of our favorite tree fruits. And then Yuma, Arizona is really like an ag tech Disneyland in the winter. It's an extraordinary market for ag. And I've made 2 trips down there to visit with University of Arizona. We did a pilot last fall. We're hoping to do another one this year. So our goal would be to have 5 or 6 locations across the American West, so we can provide access to startups in all of the major U.S. specialty crops, and that will be our goal, and that will at least kind of check the box on being able to provide access for startups to great opportunities for incubation and acceleration.
What you're describing to me is the acceleration of automation on autonomy in farms, which is really helpful for the U.S. economy, the American public, and the farming community. What is it going to take, and when do you see we start to see an uptick in the terms of percentage of automation and autonomy on farms?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're already seeing an uptick in adoption for non-harvest labor technology. So there are a handful of companies I referenced earlier in sort of precision weeding, precision spray, laser weeding, carbon robotics. We know that there are 4 or 5 companies that are starting to get some real scale on revenue, which is awesome for the space. Carbon robotics talked publicly about hitting over 100 million in revenue. We know Verdant Robotics and Eco Robotics and Nico Robotics are all doing really well also. So that group of companies looks like it's about to emerge, and everyone in the space is rooting for them. So that's one class of company, and the adoption is real. And so we're starting to see that some of the non-harvest labor is beginning to become automated, which is great. So hopefully that increases the metric. I think the next wave of companies will be in the autonomy stack, and specifically like Bonsai Robotics, Autonomy, Tim Bucher's company, and Burrow, and a few of the other ones, which will help bring autonomy to some other non-harvest labor sorts of activities as well. So that's going to be the next wave. We're also starting to see promising motions in harvest labor. And a company called Harvest Crew is in strawberries and is doing some good work. Sammy Ag Tech in leafy greens. Beagle Tech, which is a reservoir company, is working in wine grape pruning and also in celery harvest. So things are starting to shift. We're starting to see some real positive markers here in the space. And so our sense, and we'll look at this data with Western growers over the next few years, is that we'll start to see an uptick and hopefully get the double digits within the next 5 years.
What you described is a growing economy, and I've phrased the term the autonomy economy. Where do you see ag tech fitting in this global autonomy economy?
It's kind of a question I ask myself every day because we know that obviously consumer mobility and defense and some of these other areas grab a lot of headlines. We have more to do as an industry to really up level and really demonstrate, I think, to regulators, to investors, to policymakers that ag tech should have a seat at that first table. And we know it's not there yet. I'm working more and more to engage Sacramento, to engage USDA, to talk about the relationship between ag tech, autonomy, food supply, rural development. All these dots need to connect, Grayson. And then I think more and more we'll start to see ag tech sort of thought of at that first table. But I think right now it's more at the third table, the second table. But we think that that can change. And a lot of it comes down to ag tech needs to market itself better. And we need to spend more time in DC. I'm going to Sacramento now about once a month. I'm doing my second DC trip in a few weeks this year. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think that is the right question. I hope you continue to push on me there because we need to do better. We need to be at that first table.
Well, a few good things to point out. Tim Busher from Autonomy has been on 2 times, so Danny, you're going to have to come back on, and then we'll have a race of who can come on more, Danny or Tim.
We're like hosting Saturday Night Live. It's like how many times has Alec Baldwin hosted? So.
I like that. The other good piece of news here is a lot of policymakers in DC are subscribers. So this interview that we did, you're going to get that. And the other thing is I'm going to start doing a lot more on ag tech because I think it's important. So I'll be happy to be the industry's marketing machine to push this message out there. You build the companies, you find them, you fund them. I'll be the promotion machine, and then we'll bring ag tech into the present. Danny, this has been fascinating, and you're coming back because we're going to have that SNL count going on, so don't worry about that. As we look to wrap up, I want to get your last opinion on this. What is the future of autonomy and automation on farms globally, and what role do you want Reservoir to play in that?
It's a great question. I think there are a couple different roles we're going to play. One we talked a lot about, which is how can we help accelerate early stage technologies, early stage startups, and overcome some of those valleys of death, whether it's technology or commercialization. That's really the major for Reservoir, and we want to be the best in the world at that. The other area where we think we can make a big impact is tying together the role of ag tech, autonomy, rural development, workforce development. We think that will hasten positive economic development outcomes. We think it'll hasten upskilling, workforce development, mentorships, internships, all these things in rural regions. We really want to be helping drive that alongside academic institutions, community organizations, community colleges, industry, et cetera. That's something I'm really passionate about. I think is a critical ingredient here. And we think that will have a global impact because concerns about displacement are not just a US problem. It's in every market that we think autonomy is going to play a major role, which is a lot of Western countries, a lot of first world countries. So we really want to be part of that story building on a global basis. And I think the work you do on this podcast is critical to that as well, because you're shining a light on a complex issue. So we appreciate that, and I'll continue to be a regular listener.
Oh, thanks. And to the engineers that are listening, explore opportunities in ag tech and builds, and to the politicians and lawmakers that are listening, please enable autonomy and automation to thrive in the United States. It's good for the economy. And in the communities that you represent, it's going to create jobs and have a positive economic benefit. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is Reservoir. Danny, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today. And we're starting the countdown for you to come back soon.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, Grayson. Appreciate it.